Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava, Kamma, Daf Yud Zayin. Shavua Tov to everyone. We're going to get started. There's no study guide today. It's actually pretty straightforward daf, not very complicated. So I did make a guide. We're going to start with kind of off topic, as we already got off topic yesterday, into Chizkiyahu HaMelech. How did we get here? I'll remind you, because the Mishna said, what's the difference between tam and mu'ad? And one of the answer was that the mu'ad pays from the aliyah. And then we said, what does the aliyah mean? And then they say from the best of your field. Then they said, how do we get that aliyah means the best and not, something higher up or something that, from the higher amount or something like that? Well, they say, because we see by Chizkiyahu when he died. Okay, one thing we're going to see about Chizkiyahu, and this is a Gemara in Sanhedrin on Daf Tzadi Daled Amabet, it talks about, here I'll quote it, I brought up the Gemara. It says, Chizkiyahu, okay, there's a pasuk, it's a reference to, I am not going to get into all the details, we'll get to Sanhedrin, but it says that when Sancherev came, that Chizkiyahu's war against Sancherev was that one of the things he did was he got all the Jews to learn Torah. And it says that he Hayadolek, the shen, it was the shen of Chizkiyahu. That's the reference of the pasuk about the shen beating out the sword. So it says the oil of Chizkiyahu that he would keep the lights on in the Batei Knesiot and the Batei Midrashot. What did he do? He put a cherev al petach beit of midrash. Put a sword. This was his way of getting people to learn. And he said, he basically said, anyone who doesn't learn Torah is going to be killed by the sword. And he got all the Jews from all around the country to learn Torah. And that's why we're going to see this connection of Chizkiyahu and Torah in our sugya. So basically, and with this, we're going to actually end the chapter. It's an interesting way to end the chapter, almost the way we often end Masechta with the importance of limud Torah and how important Torah learning is. It seems like they're ending this first chapter with how important Torah learning is. And this actually reminds me, I mentioned in the beginning, and I'll mention it again, up on our site, and you can find it at the bottom of the daf post for the first probably 10 dapim of Bava Kamma. If you scroll down to the bottom, you'll find the Shiur of Rabbanit at the Siyum. And she talked about how important Seder Nezikin is for learning Torah and why it's really like one of the essential parts of our religion. And again, like you could say, we're talking about oxen and this and that, and why is that important, right? Why does it matter? But it really does matter. And here's where, how you act on the street and how you behave and how you treat other people is all part and the central part really of what Torah is all about, and the limudim and the way they learn and the way they think. And it's a unique Torah way, and that's really something very special. So I recommend, if you haven't listened to Rabbanit Shiur, it's in Hebrew, but there's English subtitles, and I highly recommend it. It's about 7 minutes. It's short and really good. Okay. In any case, it could be a reason as to why we're ending with the importance of learning Torah. So we ended with this thing about kavod asulo b'moto. Okay, the pasuk says that they gave him a certain amount of respect in his death. So the first explanation was they made a yeshiva on his grave, which, by the way, I didn't mention this, but the commentaries all said, what are you talking about? Lo eg larash, you're not allowed to do such a thing in a cemetery. It's like making fun of the dead people that they can't do it, and you're kind of mocking them, right? People don't wear tzitzit in a cemetery for that reason, or keep their tzitzit out. So basically, the commentaries say either it wasn't right on the kever, or because it was done out of respect for him, perhaps it was okay. Anyway, that's always answers given, but okay. Now, the next drasha starts off, top of our daf, Tanu Rabbanan, b'kavod asulo b'moto, a different drasha. Now, lo in gematria is 36, right? Like Lamed Vav. So Lamed, like the Lamed Vavnikim in the world, the 36 tzadikim in every generation. So Lamed Vav is 36. So from here they get to Zech Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda, a different interpretation of how to understand the respect they did for him. There were 36,000 people who were bare-shouldered. They tore their clothes. The more you tear your clothing in mourning, the more show of mourning you have, to the extent they all tore the garments off their shoulders. 36,000 people out of respect. Rabbi Yehuda. That's what he says. Again, he gets from the 36,000, right? 36 people wouldn't be so impressive, so he must be 36,000. Amar lo Rabbi Nechemia. Right, now you want to say, Rabbi Yehuda, that this was something unique they did just for Chizkiyahu, but also before Achav they did this. Now where they get that is a good question. Tosfot claims it's from pasuk. There's a pasuk that says you're going to do, and it's quoted in Megillah, that they're going to do a misped gadol, like a huge misped for the Jewish people. like Hadrimon ben Tavrimon. Okay, and in Megillah it says, remember Hadrimon ben Tavrimon, we just mentioned him the other day about that he's miyuchas after his father, right? So then they say, right, it's a Gentile. They say, what do you mean it's going to be a huge hesped like the hesped of Hadrimon? That doesn't make any sense. Well, a hesped of a Gentile. So they say, Targaminan kimisped achav ben Omri katil yehe Hadrimon ben Tavrimon. So basically what they're saying is, no. It was the hesped for the Hadrimon, the one who he killed. Who did he kill? Achav. That's what the Targum on that pasuk says, as quoted in Megillah. Now, why? Tosfot explains why were there so many people who mourned for, right? That he's a sign of a hesped gadol. Why so many people mourn for him? Well, they say it was in a war, and because it was in a war, all the people were there, and therefore they all mourned for him. So you ended up with a built-in crowd. Okay. So basically, even though Achav is this terrible king, he ends up with this huge sign of mourning, and that they all learn from these drashot, and it comes up in the day. Okay. Point being that you can't say that that's what made Chizkiyahu unique. Maybe 36,000 people did mourn for him, but they did the same thing for Achav, and he was a terrible king, so you can't say that was out of, that shows how great Chizkiyahu was. Then you'll say the same about Achav, and also we're trying to say he was unique. Okay, that's already unique. They put a Sefer Torah on his bed, meaning right when they either when they buried him or before they buried him, they put it where on his coffin. And they said the following line: this person did what it says in this book. Okay, so Chizkiyahu kept the mitzvot from the Torah, and that was the respect they showed him, which sounds good. But the Gemara asks, wait a minute. But wait, nowadays we do this. So, which we don't really do nowadays, but in their day they did. Something's going to be strange in the sugya, which we'll see in a minute. But they said, but we do that nowadays. So again, if you want to say, well, we did Chizkiyahu was so unique, but we do that nowadays for big, we don't do it for everybody, but when there's a big Talmud scholar or a Torah scholar, we do that for them. To which the Gemara answers, no, there's a difference between the way we do it and the way they did it. What's going to be strange about this is the Gemara is going to give two options and about the differences, and each option is going to say something different about what we do today, in the words of the Gemara, which is strange. It's almost going to be like they weren't sure what they do nowadays. Isn't that weird? Aren't they talking from their day? So let's just read it and then you'll see. So the first answer is afuke mafkina nanuche lo manchina. We take out a Sefer Torah, meaning we bring it to the funeral, but we don't put it down on the coffin. V'ibait ema. Some people say anuche nami manchina. We do put it down, but kiyem lo amrina. But we don't say the words. Right? He fulfilled what it says in this book. So what's strange about this is that the Gemara is so sure that this is a custom that we do, but there seems to be a debate about what exactly the custom that we do is, which is strange. Wouldn't you just look and see, and you would know what happens? So either it's rare that they do it, and that could be, right? If you didn't happen to be at the funeral, you wouldn't really know. It's a possibility. Second possibility is it could be this sugya developed in different time periods. And one person gave an answer based on the custom in his time, and another person gave an answer based on the custom in his time. So what you see is one sugya, it looks like it's all happening at the same time, but no, the Ibayit Ema could have been added later by someone who said, that's not what we do something different, and then added, oh, well, then this must be the difference. Okay? In any case, we've distinguished between what happened in the time of Chizkiyahu and what happens now. Again, we can then say, yes, it was the fact that they put the Sefer Torah down and said these words, and either in our generation, again, the generation of the Gemara, don't do this, but in their generation, either they took out a Sefer Torah and didn't put it down, or they put it down but didn't say the words Now we're going to have a story, and in the beginning, the details aren't going to seem so important. Depending on a version, we're going to read two versions of the Gemara. The beginning details may play an important role here, or maybe totally really not so necessary, just maybe told because that's the story and how it goes. So I'm a Rabba Barbachan. I would go after Rabbi Yochanan to ask him questions a lot. Sometimes he would go into the bathroom. Like I'd ask him a question, he'd have to go to the bathroom. And and I would ask him something right as he was about to go in the bathroom. But he wouldn't answer me. Okay, obviously he wouldn't answer me when he was in the bathroom. He would get out of the bathroom, wash his hands first. Now, he would wear tefillin all day, which was a custom people used to do. So we would take off his tefillin to go into the bathroom. He can't go into the bathroom with tefillin. He would come out, wash his hands, put his tefillin on back on, umevarech, and he would make the bracha again on the tefillin. Okay, so could be you're just learning a halacha here, right? That's what you're supposed to do. Anyway, the Hadran Amarlan, and then he would respond to me, the answer to my question. And here, one day, I asked him about this thing about Chizkiyahu, and he said, Afilu kiyem amrinan. Actually, I'm going to give you a third answer. Nowadays, we put a Sefer Torah, right? We put it down on the body. We say the words kiyem zeh mashkatu b'zeh, but limed lo amrinan. But you got it wrong with Chizkiyahu. Chizkiyahu, they said he taught what it says in this Torah. He was greater than it wasn't just that he kept the Torah, it was that he taught the Torah to others. And that's based on what we saw in that Gemara in Sanhedrin, that he was responsible for teaching all these Jews Torah because he made sure they all got to the Beit Midrash, and he kind of feared them into coming, but he caused a huge revival of Torah by forcing people to come to the Beit Midrash. Now, Mar. So now we're going to have a question. And this is a very basic issue. And it's a very interesting, we're going to see Machlokes Rashi Tosfot, very fascinating about what's more important. Okay, so Mar gadol limud Torah shalimud mevi lidei ma'aseh. So wait a minute. Isn't limud Torah is great? Why? Because the limud brings you to ma'aseh. So what's better? To say someone learned Torah right now, even though it says he taught, we're going to view it as learn, okay? We'll get back to the difference between teaching and learning. But right now, let's just assume it means he learned Torah. So if you learn Torah, the value of learning Torah, according to this statement, Gadol limud Torah, shalimud mevi lidei ma'aseh. What's the value? And this is why it's a fascinating discussion. What's the value of learning Torah here? The value of learning Torah is because it brings you to action, which means what's more important, learning or doing? Doing the mitzvot is more important because learning is just a means to getting to the doing. So, lo kashya halamigmar halag move. So the Gemara answers, oh, no, that's not difficult. Because if you want to put them on a scale, there's learning is important, but learning is only important because it's a means to an end. The end is doing the mitzvot. So you have to learn in order to understand the mitzvot and keep the mitzvot. Once you do the mitzvot, what's higher than that? Well, not only doing mitzvot, but teaching them to others. And that's why Chizkiyahu, according to Rabbi Yochanan, got the title, they said in his death, he taught Torah, and that was greater than keeping the Torah. But for sure, keeping the Torah is more important than learning the Torah. So that's Rashi. And Rashi says, in the line that said, Mevi lidei ma'aseh, he says, Alma ma'aseh adif. It's clear that doing mitzvot is more important than learning Torah. Well, Tosfot, in Tosfot's typical manner, likes to compare sugyot and say, wait, let's look at this out of the context of our daf, our chapter, our masechet. Let's look at a different masechet, and actually a masechet kiddushin that we just finished. So Tosfot says, Kasher Rabbeinu tam, okay, quotes Rashi in Hamar Mar Gadol Talmud Torah. He says, Kasher Rabbeinu tam, in the second line there, De'ad it's the opposite. In the end of kiddushin, it's in the middle of kiddushin, in the end of the first parak of kiddushin. By the way, it's interesting. It ended the first parak of kiddushin. It's ending the first parak of Bava Kamma. And that, again, comparison here, Talmud gadol mimaseh. Okay, there we said that learning is more important than doing. And there were the rabbis who were in the Aliyat Beit Nudza and Lod, and they were asked, Talmud gadol or maaseh gadol. If you remember, they had this question. Some people said Talmud is gadol. Some people write Talmud means just learning, not Talmud like the Talmud, but learning. And one said, doing the mitzvah. V'nimnu kulam v'amru, and they got up and they made they took a vote, and they said, Talmud gadol shemevi lidei maaseh. So Talmud is greater because Talmud leads you to maaseh, but not only because it's a means to an end. It's just there's value to learning Torah and there's value to doing mitzvah. But Torah is even better because you learn Torah and it brings you to do maaseh, to do the mitzvah. So Rabbeinu Tam understands this Gemara differently than Rashi does. He says, the question is this. Ha'amar mar shetalmud mevi lidei maaseh. In which case, if Talmud brings you to action, to do mitzvot, then basically by saying kiyem, it includes lamad. Okay, I'm not going to read it inside, but that's what he says. If you kept the Torah, now this is a good question, right? Could you keep the Torah without learning? Right? This is a good question for women in general, right? Women for years have kept Torah, even though they didn't necessarily learn it all. But Tosfot, maybe because they were so learning oriented, said it can't be that you could do the Torah without learning. And therefore, once you say kiyem, it includes to learn. So to say kiyem is the same as saying he learned. To which the Gemara says, oh no, learning, teaching is different. Okay, so again, the answer is the same according to this. But the conclusion you come to about what's the value of learning, is there an inherent value in learning, even if it doesn't, if without mitzvot? Can you do mitzvot without learning? Right? There's a big debate here about what the values are. But I wanted to even bring a third approach, which is the answer the Gemara gives. Okay, now one could say it's very obvious. To teach is the greatest thing, right? For me as a teacher to hear that, right? Of course, the most important thing. Okay, that's even greater than all the others. But there's a girsa that says the exact opposite and actually connects it with what Rabbi Yochanan did. Notice Rabbi Yochanan's actions. He was asked a question, and what did he do? First, he washed his hands. Then he put on his tefillin. Then he made a blessing on it. And only at the end did he answer the question. So with the other interpretation, it's quoted both in Rabbeinu Hananel and at the end of this Tosfot that we've been reading. I'll read it here. Sholta to Rav Chai Gaon, Lo Garsin, and he doesn't have the words Kiyem Amrinan Limed Lo Amrinan. Okay, he doesn't have those words. Ela Garas Umanach Tefillin Bahadar Amrala. At the end of the story, they say, no, we're going to learn it from the fact that what Rabbi Yochanan did. First, he put his tefillin on, then he said. And they basically say, right, why did he do that? If Talmud is gadol, learning is the most important, he should have done it before he put on his tefillin. Tefillin is an action, a mitzvah. And to teach is so important. To which they answer, no. It's definitely the opposite. When it says halad migmar, halad mor, there's difference between learning and there's difference between teaching. It's the opposite direction. Okay, I'm in the last few lines of Tosfot now. To learn yourself is more important because it brings you to do the mitzvot. And that's why, right? He said, first I'm going to put my tefillin on because my actions are more important. My own learning to do action, right, which is going to lead me to actions, is the most important thing. Then I can go teach. But first, I was thinking, I'm not sure, you have to think about why this would be, but it could be the analogy we always go back to about the mask on the airplane, right, the oxygen mask. Put on your own mask first, then you can do others, right? First, you have to do the mitzvot, you have to learn them, do your mitzvot. Then after that, you could teach. Teaching is important. It's a mitzvah, but it's not as important as doing your own mitzvah first. And that's shown by the order of what Rabbi Yochanan did. So we have a fascinating discussion here. Amasi more important, is learning more important? Is learning more important? Is teaching more important? So I'm leaving you with that question. We don't have answers to any of those questions, but it does show at least. And again, the question is there a value to Torah if it's not leading you to mitzvot? Is there a value of doing mitzvot without learning them? And all sorts of fascinating questions. With that, Hadran Allah. Oh, we didn't finish. Sorry, we're still not done. Now we're going to go to the last section. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. My dichtiv, Ashrechem zorei al kol mayim, mishalchei regel ashor b'chamor. You might remember we started with this pasuk. We didn't read the beginning part of it, but we read the end of it. Mishalchei regel ashor b'chamor. That was our proof that the pasuk b'shalach et be'iro, shalach has to do with regel. Remember, shalach et be'iro is your animal, and we said, mishalchei regel ashor b'chamor. Here you see, regel goes with shiluach. So now they say, we don't really understand what this pasuk means yet, right? Happy is those who plant near the water, those who send out the regel of the shore and the chamor. It's not a very clear pasuk. What do they say here? Here's the drasha. Kol osek b'Torah ubigmilu chasadim zoche lenachalat shnei shvatim. If you learn Torah and do chesed, you will get the nachala, you will get the rewards of 2 tribes. Still, it's not clear how they got from there and what this means. So how do we see it? Shenema, Ashrechem zorei ein zriya el tzedakah. To plant means to sow the seeds. It means doing good deeds, charity. Shenemar zir'u lachem letzedakah v'kitzru lefi chesed. Plant with tzedakah and you will reap through chesed. Okay, that means do good deeds. Okay, and that's connected with planting. Ve'ein mayim ela Torah, and mayim we all know is an analogy to Torah. And therefore, anyone who's thirsty, which is thirsty for Torah, should go to water. That's where you'll find Torah. So that's the reference, the zri'ah. Those who plant, al kol mayim, that's a reference to doing chesed and learning Torah. What's that? Yosef. You will get a canopy like Yosef, which basically means plenty. Okay. Dichtiv ben porat Yosef benot tzada alei shor. Now, here's the reference. The shore in the pasuk is a reference to the shore, which is actually a wall. It's not a shore, but the way things will grow over the wall, like canopied over the wall, that will be your reward. So the word shore in the pasuk is a reference to Yosef. V'zochet, right? These are all from the brachot in Breshit, in Vayichi. V'zochet lenachalat Yisachar, dichtiv Yisachar chomegar. These are in the blessings that Yaakov gives to them. The chamor is a reference to Yisachar. Okay, because that's what it says by Yisachar. So basically, you'll get the material rewards that they got. Some people say, no, it's different things you're going to get from Yosef. And we're actually, Yosef, we're going to go to the end of Dvarim when Moshe gives him the brachot, and Yisachar, we're going to see from Divrei Hayami. This is something we could use right now, right? Which is the enemies will fall before you, like Yosef's enemies. Right? The nations will come head to head, and basically we will prevail over our enemies. That's a blessing that Yosef gets. And intelligence and knowledge and understanding from Yisachar. I guess understanding is Bina. Okay, so you're going to get those two rewards of them, not the material wealth, but more the understanding and the ability to overcome our enemies, which maybe go together, right? The more understanding you have, the more ability you have to overcome your enemies. And with that, Hadran alach arba avot. And with that, we finish with this concept of the importance of learning Torah. Now, also the importance of learning Torah is a way to basically understand what going forward now, we have to go in depth and to understand all the things that Torah said. It's part of understanding what our responsibilities in this world are. It's all about learning Torah and understanding things properly. So now we're going to start the second chapter, and I already mentioned this when we got to the Hamisha Tamim and Chamisha Muadin, that when we got to the list of, there was shen mu'edet lechol tara oil, and when we started talking about mu'ah, we started talking about the shen, the regel mu'edet l'spor b'derech chilucha, shor mu'ad, shor mazik b'shut and nizak la'adam. We're basically going to go through all these things, which, by the way, reminds me, I forgot to mention in class, we got to the snake. So Shuli Mishkin in Flashback this week had a whole article on our site about snakes. So if you haven't read it yet, I could recommend a reading. So now the second chapter is going to be modeled after that Mishnah with one minor difference, which is instead of starting with shen, it starts with regel. Okay, why that is, it's a good question. The Meiri claims that if you remember the shor born of ehev er, there were two explanations what shor meant, and one of them, right, there was the machlok of Rav and Shmuel. What mave means, according to one explanation, shor is regel. So it basically goes back to that first Mishnah about regel. Okay, also we just ended with this mishlachei regel hashor b'chamor. Basically, we start with regel for whatever reason. But the rest of it's going to be really ordered like that Mishnah. So there's two ways to read this Mishnah, okay? The Gemara is going to read it like this. When mu'edet means expected. What's expected damages by regel, okay, by trampling. And then it says, l'shaber b'derech chilucha, to break as it walks. Habehema mu'edet lahalech kedarkau l'shaber. And then it says something that seems to repeat word for word the first line. It says the behemah is a mu'ad, to walk in a normal manner and break. It's expected. Okay, so that seems like a total repeat. Doesn't make sense. The Gemara is going to ask. Before we get to the Gemara's answer, I want to suggest a possible read. The first line, Ketzad regel mu'edet l'shaber b'derech chilucha, is a quote from that previous Mishnah. So it could be just quoting that Mishnah. We had a Mishnah that said regel mu'edet l'shaber b'derech chilucha. How is that? And now they just explain it in their own words, even though it's really kind of the same words. But the Gemara is not going to read it that way. The Gemara is going to say these are two sentences that say the same thing. And by the way, the exact same thing, I'll read it now because the Gemara is also going to get to it. When it gets to the shen in the next Mishnah on Yud Ten Amud Bet, Ketzad Hashem Mu'edet, and then it says Le'echol Tara Oila, right? It's going to eat things that it typically eats. That's shen. And then it says Habehema Mu'edet Le'echol Perot Yirakot. An animal is expected to eat fruits and vegetables. Now that's also the same thing. But again, the words Hashem Mu'edet Le'echol Tara Oila are taken from the previous Mishnah. And the easiest way to read that Mishnah is to just say they're quoting Ketzad, the quote from the previous Mishnah, Hashem Mu'edet Le'echol Tara Oila. And the answer is, and it gives you like, what is hara oila? Perot and yirakot, fruits and vegetables. But the Gemara is not going to see it that way. The Gemara is going to view this as ketzad rega mu'edet, ketzad Hashem mu'edet, and then they're basically giving two answers, which doesn't really make sense, and the Gemara is going to have to explain it some other way. But I wanted you to see, it's important when you read the Gemara, not to always assume that the Gemara has the only answer to the question. First of all, oftentimes the Rishami will answer it differently, or you'll see in parallel sources other things, or sometimes the Gemara just understood things in one way. It doesn't mean there's other possible ways to understand it. So now we get to some details, right? The animal could kick. If you remember kicking, right? If the animal was kicking, tzrorot minatzim mitachat ragleha, or it's just walking, and as it walks or kicks, rocks, pebbles come shooting up in the air, and they fall down on the ground. V'shavra et hakelim, and they break vessels. Mishalem chatzi nezek. We've learned this before. This is what we call chatzi nezek tzrorot. okay, which today we're going to learn. Maybe we shouldn't call it chatzi nezek tzrorot because there's actually a machloket about it, but we're not going to see the machloket just yet. So the Mishnah says very simply what we've seen before, which is, and if you remember, we said it's a hilchat hagemirale. It's one of these old traditions, like a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, that if they kick pebbles and the pebbles damage, even if they kick on purpose, it seems, right? That's from the first part. It was kicking, right? Which isn't, maybe intending. So I was thinking about this. If an animal kicks with intent, doesn't mean they were kicking with intent to break. Like I was thinking of little kids. Little kids kick something on purpose, but they don't mean to break something. And of course they break something, right? They'll kick something and the thing will smash into something else and it'll break the other item. So an animal like a child doesn't really have intent to damage. So we're not going to make you obligated for full damages on that because it was indirect. Again, what does it mean indirect, right? They kick something and it damaged. You might think that's direct, but no, it's an indirect way of doing damages. And because it wasn't like if a grown-up kicked on purpose to break something, that would be something different. But an animal doesn't have that kind of knowledge and they were just walking and kicking. It's just what they do. So therefore, whether it was on purpose or whether it was just as they walked, pebbles started, flying in the air and broke kelim, that's half damages. Darsa ala kli ushvarto. If it went on a vessel, okay, they stepped on a vessel and broke it, nafal al kli ushvaro, and then as they broke that vessel broke into pieces. Pieces went flying in the air and broke another vessel, right? And it falls on another vessel. So here in one action, you could be liable full damages for the first one and half damages for the second. Because again, the first was direct, the second was indirect. Now we say, so just so you know, it's not just animals, it's also birds. Birds also damage as they walk. So if a bird is walking, a chicken here, okay, a chicken is like an example for any kind of bird. A chicken is walking, they also break while they're walking. Hayad zlil kashor biraglav, o shahayam mahadesu mishaber takelim mishalem chatzi nezek. If there was a string attached or something, there's a big debate what exactly zlil means, but if it's, let's say, a string attached, let's say the bird was walking, either you tied something around you could have tied something with a string around its leg, and then whatever is tied around, let's say it's a string, so the string hooks onto something else and breaks it, or there was a vessel you attached, and as it's walking, the vessel smashes into something, or it was mehades, it was kind of jumping around or hopping and broke vessels on the way, mishalem chatzi nezek. Again, as it was jumping, the thing that was attached to it hit into something, again, that's indirect damage, and that's chatzi nezek. And yes, you're asking, didn't we see tzrorot? We did. We saw it a few times, I believe. We definitely saw it. What I remember right now is that we saw it in the context of chatzi nezek knas or mammon. That whole debate, well, they say it's different from chatzi nezek tzrorot, which is definitely mammon, right? That's different. Okay, now the Gemara starts on Amud Bet. Amalei Ravina l'Rava. Hainu regel, hainu behema. So the first question is, Ravina asked Rava, remember who's asking who, because we're going to have a discussion between them. Ravina says to Rava, I don't understand line 1 and line 2. First, we said regel. Then we said the behema is mu'edet, right? We said, how is regel mu'edet? To break as it walks. The behema, the animal, is mu'edet lahalek kidarkau l'shabel. That's the exact same thing. Why is it saying one, it introduces behema in the second line, and it just says randomly in the first line? It doesn't make any sense. So Amarle, Rava answers, not like I answered, right? Which isn't the first part is a quote of the previous Mishna, and then it gets into the details. But Amarle, Tane, so Rava answers, Tane avot v'katane toladot. The Mishnah started with the av, that was the first line, and the second line starts getting into toladot. And what it means is not that it tramples, okay? The first line is shaber b'derech hilucha. That means as it's walking, it tramples. The second line, when it says mu'edet lahalech kedarkau l'shaber, means as it walks, it could damage things. You might remember, and we're going to see Bright to talk about this, there's a burden on its back and it knocks over, right? Like someone with a backpack, right? And the backpack knocks into someone and damages, not the person, but the backpack. Or they hit someone, with the side of their body instead of with their legs, right? All sorts of things that happen as the animal walked without any sort of intent, but because the animal is bulky and has things attached to it, and they damage directly as opposed to the delil, which damaged indirectly, right? Where it hit into something, which then it went. By the way, Rashi says there with the delil that the delil went flying off. The delil went flying off. That it kind of detached and then damaged. And real tzrorot. But here it damages directly. That's a tolada of red. So line number 1 is avot, line number 2 is toladot. Well, comes, and that's why I showed you already the Mishnah with the shen. Elameata, Ravina says to him, well, then look at the seifa. The next Mishnah, de katani hashen mu'edet, and then it says habeima mu'edet, my avodu my toladodika. There it said, an animal eats what it typically eats, and then it says the animal, right? It didn't say animal in the first line. It just said what's shen, when it eats what it typically eats, and then it said, and the animal is forewarned already, right? Previously warned, meaning expected to eat fruits and vegetables. So that's not an av and a tolada. That's both the av. That's the main action. Okay, so you can't say avot and toladot. So Rava answered him jokingly. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean jokingly or mockingly, or it's hard to exactly know how to explain that word in this context, but he answered him in the following way. He said, look, Rava says, I give a good explanation for this Mishnah. I don't know the second Mishnah. You give me an explanation for the second Mishnah, but basically saying, don't question my interpretation based on the next Mishnah. This Mishnah is one Mishnah. That's a Mishnah is a different Mishnah. Our Mishnah repeats it because it was going from avot to toladot. Hopefully you can come up with some explanation for the next Mishnah. I don't know. Okay, so it's a little bit jokingly, or I don't know exactly how to use that word there. And we also don't know. We don't know his tone. Maybe he was mocking him, maybe not. But he basically said, kind of, I would even say casually, oh, well, I got this Mishnah, you got the next one. V'tamamai, well, it doesn't seem like Ravina actually answered the next Mishnah, but the Gemara tells us, what's the reason there? Amar Rav Ashi, Tana shen de chaya, v'katane shen de behema. This is an interesting answer. The first line was talking about a domesticated animal. So, ketzad Hashem mu'ed, that this is for an animal that's domesticated. And then katani shen de behema. And then the second line starts off. Now, it didn't say chaya in the first line, but since it said behema in the second line, we're going to assume the first line was relating to a chaya. The difference is, right, a chaya is one's domesticated, could live in your, in your house, in your property, whereas a more wild animal, sorry, the opposite. I just said it wrong. Chaya is undomesticated and behema is domesticated. Okay, so that's the difference. So now they say, why is there a difference? Well, sal kadata chamina, you might have thought that you're only responsible for the domesticated animals. V'shilachet, why would you think that? V'shilachet bi'iro ktiv. If you remember that pasuk, shilachet bi'iro u'bi'er b'se'acher. That's what we learned, shen and regel. Now, shilachet bi'iro, you might think, is behema in chayalo. Why is that? Well, when the Jews in the desert start complaining they don't have water, in Bamidbar chapter 20, in verse 4, they say, why are we going to die here? We have no food, no water. Sorry, they say we have no water. We're going to die. Anachnu u'bi'irenu, us and our animals. Now, our animals are our domesticated animals, right? That's what they had. So basically, we're going to say, maybe it's only animals then, domesticated and not undomesticated animals. So kamash malan, the first line is coming to teach you also chayot, de chaya bichlal behema, because the word behema in the Torah often includes domesticated and non-domesticated animals. So here we're going to assume you're liable. If you have a chaya that you're responsible for, then you would be liable for damages. To which the Gemara asks, well, that still doesn't make sense. You want to say in line 1 is talking about the less obvious case, chaya, and line 2 is talking about the more obvious case, behema. You would think it would be the reverse, right? It should have done the behema and then the chaya, the extra one that you're including. To which they answer, well, chaya was learned out from a drasha. It wasn't explicit in the pasuk. So that's always, and we've seen this answer many times, if you learn it out on your own, and this maybe connects with the end of the previous chapter that we just finished, which is there's something beloved about things that you learn on your own, because learning Torah is so special and you learn halachot from that. Therefore, since the rabbis learned it out on their own, they wanted to mention that one first, which sounds okay, except what? Well, what's our Mishnah? Our Mishnah starts off with the avot, the general categories, and then goes to the toladot. Now, which one's mentioned in the Torah? The avot. Which ones are learned out? The toladot. So if you're going to say they always put the drasha, what they learned on their own first, well, then our Mishnah is out of order. Then you should have said the one that's not written in the Torah first, the toladot, to which they say that's a ridiculous suggestion. In the shen case, they're both the av malacha the av nezek, the main category of nezikin, which is eating, whether it's an animal or a domesticated or non-domesticated. Well, then if we're already both are talking about the main thing, the eating, then we're going to put the one we learned from drasha first. Aval, but here, it makes absolutely no sense to start with the subcategory before you even get to the main category. And that's why our Mishna starts off with the main category and then gets to the subcategories, even though the subcategories are learned from a drasha. Okay, so now that's the answer. Or ibayit ema, I did something regel, patak beregel. Or they want to talk about the regel, they mentioned in the Torah, because they ended the previous chapter with the regel, and therefore they want to start with the regel. Okay, and that was in the previous Mishna about the Chamisha Tamim, the Chamisha Muadim, and there it said regel. So then it just started with the main thing, and then it got into the Torah. I don't know, maybe that's the second answer, although the first answer is pretty strong. Now we're going to get into a bunch of brightot that did get into details, and there's one major important detail that we didn't mention yet in our Mishna, which kind of should have been mentioned, but it isn't, but we'll see that right now. Tanu Rabbanan, behema mu'edel halech kedarkau l'shabel. Ketzad. So often, by the way, the Gemara brings brightot that fill in, that, the Mishna didn't say enough, so they bring brightot to bring more details. So what are examples of this? Behema shenichnesah lechatzer hanizak. That's the first main important point our Mishna didn't say. Remember, you're not liable for regel if it's in the public domain, because again, if I left fruit in the public domain and your animal came and ate it, I should have known that your animal was going to come and eat it or step on my stuff. I shouldn't have left it in the middle of the road. So that's my fault, not your fault. But if your animal comes into my field, well, that's your fault, not mine. So it has to be in the chatzer hanizak. Vehizika bigufa derech hilucha. Now here we're going to get into all the toladot. It injures with its body as it's walking, which again doesn't mean only trampling, it means all sorts of other things. These are the toladot. Ubesara derech hilucha with its hair, beukaf shaleh with a saddle on it, bishlif shaleh, which could be a saddlebag. There's different interpretations. Beprumbia shebefia, the bit in its mouth. Bizuk shebetzavara, the bell that's on its neck. V'chamor b'masao, a donkey with its burden on its back. Mishalem nezek shalem. Then you pay full damages. Sumchus omer. Here we get to this unique halacha of Sumchus. Tzrorot. If it was tzrorot, though, indirect damages, v'chazir shayan over b'ashpa b'yizik, which we'll see exactly what this means in a minute, but the chazir is a pig, is rummaging in the garbage dump and damages. Mishalem nezek shalem. They paid full damages. So notice this is full damages, not half damages like we saw in our Mishna, and we don't see the other opinion here about the chatzi nezek. This just says full damages. This is the opinion that disagrees with Kamma, with the rabbis. So first they have a problem with this chazir. Hizik, pshita. If he damaged, obviously you're going to be a liable nezek shalem. What's the unique halacha here? What they mean is he's rummaging in the garbage and things fly out of the garbage and then they damage them, which makes sense also. If it's in the garbage, who cares about if he damages something in the garbage? So it must be a din of tzrorot. This is just another example of tzrorot. So they say, second question on this brightot, tzrorot man dechar shmayu. Where do we even get to tzrorot? So what's all of us saying? By the way, tzrorot are full damages. No one said they weren't full damages. So where does he come from? To which they obviously answer, there's obviously things missing in this Mishna, and this is how it should be. Tzrorot ki orchayu chatzi nezek, that the Kamma says, if it's tzrorot though, indirect damages, your pebbles got kicked up by the animal, and then the pebbles went and damaged and broke something, then it's only half damages. And a chazir shayan over b'ashpa b'yitiz v'yizik mishalem chatzi nezek, and a pig that was going rummaging in the garbage and rocks, pebbles came or something came flying out of there and damaged, you pay half damages. To which Sumchus says, Sumchus omer tzrorot v'chatzir shayan over b'ashpa b'yitiz v'yizik mishalem nezek shalem. Sumchus says, no, you pay full damages. We're going to get soon to what the machloka between them is about. Tanu Rabbanan, but before that, we're going to have more brightot about this. They're very repetitive, but they're talking about different details. So again, Tarnagolim. So now we have chickens. Same idea, right? That this is, chickens are now jumping from place to place, and their wings hit into something. Then, by the way, this could be flying, okay? Do chickens fly? You can look it up. It seems chickens could fly. Okay, it could be also just chickens is a term for birds. Okay, it could be just birds in general. So somehow this chicken is a little bit flying, perhaps fluttering, some sort of movement, and their wings hit into something. You pay full damages. But if the wings as they moved caused a wind to blow, and then the wind caused damage, Mishalmim chatzi nezek, then it's half damages. That's again indirect. Sumchus omer nezek shalem. Again, Sumchus disagrees. Says full damages. Tanya idach, another bright. Tarnagolim shayumad sima gabe isa. They were hopping on a dough. Val gabe perot, or on fruits. Vitin fu o niklu mishalem nezek shalem. And they made it dirty, or they stuck their beak in there. They pecked. They're going to have to pay full damages. But as they were jumping, it caused, or hopping, they caused some dirt to fly in the air, or pebbles. Mishalmim chatzi nezek. Again, this is all repeating the same idea with different cases. Sumchus omer nezek shalem. Tanya idach, again, Sumchus says full damages. Another bright. Again, it was flying, fluttering, something from place to place. So if it was flying and it broke kelim, you pay half damages. Now, it doesn't say who this is, and it doesn't say Sumchus disagrees, but the Gemara says, obviously, stomach Rabbanit. This obviously holds like the rabbis, because it says tzrorot is chatzi nezek. I'm a Rava. Rava says, now we're going to finally understand their opinions. Sumchus actually, even though until now we've been learning tzrorot is chatzi nezek, Sumchus actually makes the most sense. Because if you flap your wings and the wind makes a wind and the wind damages, of course you cause that damage. So what's the difference? It's kocho. It's almost like you're shooting an arrow. It's a little bit of a difference, but it's not so different, basically. It's an action that the body of the animal caused, which caused the damage in the end. So what if it was a little indirect? And therefore, you're liable full damages. But the rabbis make no sense. Either we say it's kagufo, in which case you have to pay full damage. If we say it's not really from your actions, then you shouldn't pay any damages. So how do you get to chatzi nezek? Hadran Rava, Rava then explained, la'olam kagufo dami. It really is kagufo, but chatzi nezek tzrorot hilchot hagamir alei. But there's a tradition. They have an ancient tradition, whether it's halacha Mishna Sinai, something like that. They have an ancient tradition, and Sumchus obviously didn't have that tradition. So what they're really saying is we don't really have an answer why we have this chatzi nezek, but it is right, and it matches what we saw before, which is it's mamon, because really you're supposed to pay the whole thing. It's just we cut it in half for whatever reason. Again, it's not for no reason. It is somewhat of a reason because it is a little indirect. Amar Rava, kol shebezav tamei ben nezakim mishalem nezek shalem. Kol shebezav tahor ben nezakim mishalem chatzi nezek. This is not clear what exactly he means, but a zav right now the Gemara is going to assume that what we mean is tumat hesed. That means if I'm a mazav, or a zavai would be because I'm a female, there's a certain type of tumah that doesn't exist by others, and that's why they assume this is what they're referring to. It's called tumat hesed. It means I can move something, and it moves something else. Okay. Now, since I touch something, and that something touched something else and caused it to move, I can pass on tumah to that. So if I damage in that way, I push something which pushes something else, which causes the damage, I'm going to be liable full damages. But if it would be tahor, like I pushed something, or let's say I threw something, and that thing hit into something else, that thing would not become tamei. It would only be if I'm touching the other thing and that touches the other thing. Now, that's more like tzrorot. I kick the tzror, right? And then the tzror hits something else. So then you would pay chatzi nezek. So they say, Rabba tzrorot, that's the law of tzrorot. What's he teaching? To which they say, oh no, so it must be something else. Lo, Rava egla mashcha b'karon kamashman. He wanted to teach us about it. Sorry, egla moshecha b'karon. If you have an animal pulling a carriage, and there's a zav sitting in the carriage, and that there's something called tumat midras, or moshaf. If the zav is sitting on something, now, if the zav is in a carriage being pulled by something and it goes on top of vessels, those vessels will become impure because the zav is being carried sitting on something which is then on top of something else. But if the carriage kicks stones, pebbles, and the pebbles hit into something else, then already it's going to be it's not going to be a zav. That's going to be like tzrorot. So likewise, if the animal is pulling a carriage and the carriage breaks vessels directly by going over them, just like the zav would have made those vessels impure, the animal is responsible for breaking them. But if, as it's pulling the carriage, pebbles came out and damaged something, that will be chatzi nezek. So it's like tzrorot, but it's giving an example where it's a little bit more distant even, because it wasn't that the animal went over them, it was the animal was pulling the carriage that went over them, and that would be like the zav. Tani kavatei Rava, and here's a braita like Rava, which we recognize all the words of this braita, except there's one added case, which is our case. So again, these are all cases of toladot of regel. בהמה שנכנסה לחצר ניזק והזיקה בגופה דרך הילוכה, בשערה דרך הילוכה, בעוקף שעלה, בשליף שעלה, בפומביה שבפיה, בזוג שבצווארה, וחמור מסעו. Okay, these are all the cases we saw before. I'm not going to repeat them. ועגלה מושכת בקרון. And if he was pulling this carriage and it broke, mishalem nezek shalem. So there you have it, that you're going to pay full damages if, right, even though the animal itself didn't run over it, but the carriage it was pulling did. Tanu Rabbanan, another bright. Another similar case. Again, not similar, but a different case. He was chewing on a rope, and then the rope was carrying a pail, and he chewed the rope to the fact that the rope broke, and the pail fell and broke. Obviously, full damage for that. Ba'e Rava. Darsa ala kli v'lo shavarto v'nitgalgel l'makom acher v'nishbar mahu. We'll kind of end with this question, which is, we'll start the question off, which is, an animal stepped on a kli, caused the kli to roll and kind of, fall and roll. It didn't break, but then rolled, and as it fell, it broke. Okay, I'll give you an example in the house, right? You drop a mug on the floor. It doesn't break at the first impact, right? It kind of could fall. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it breaks and then bounces a little and then breaks. So if it breaks on the bounce, basically, not on the first one, but after, is that tzrorot or not? Okay, that's a good question. It's kind of in between. Do we say, look, in the end, it was the fact that the animal caused it to fall, even though it didn't break till it rolled a little more and hit into some other spot in the ground, but it was really the impact of the fall that eventually made it break. Or do we say no? It goes by how it broke, and it was already indirect because it didn't break the first second. It broke later when it hit into something else, right? It rolled and then, broke from the impact there. So let's learn it from here. Fascinating case. We'll get to this later. Someone throws a kli from on top of a roof. Now, there's no way that kli is not going to break. However, in the end, it doesn't break because they did it. Someone took a baseball bat, smashed it from, let's say, the window on its way down and broke it. The second person is exempt. Why? Because they say mana tavira tava. Okay, patur, because we say mana tavira tava. That guy who hit it with a bat broke a broken kli. It would have broken anyway, even though it wasn't broken at the time. It would have broken anyway from the first impact. So therefore, we would say the same thing here. The first impact is really what eventually caused, like it would have broken, right? It broke because it rolled, but really it's not exactly the same. You can see why. Because it didn't break on the first impact, right? That one would have broken on the first impact, the other case, but it basically goes by the first action. That's what we're going to say here, to which they say, why are you even asking the question then? To which they say, because Rava himself, right, Rava said there, this is Rava asking the question, so they say, L'Rava pshitale, L'Rava mabayale. Rava, to him it was obvious. Rava was the one who had a question about it. Okay, so that's why we're going to be left with this question of Rava. We'll get to the answer tomorrow. So quick review of today's talk. We started with Chizkiyahu, Amelech, and we talked about what's more valuable, learning Torah, teaching Torah, doing the mitzvot, all that, the whole discussion. And there we started with this Mishna. We talked about the double language of the Mishna of regel. Why does it say in two lines kind of the same thing? And comparing it to the next Mishna in shen, where we have the same thing. Gemara gave the answer, right? Rava gave the answer he gave, and then the Gemara answered for shen. Then we had this different brightot about different toladot of regel, all sorts of, and the din of tzrorot, and the fact that there's a machloket about tzrorot, whether it's full damages or half damages, whether you have this tradition about it or you don't have the tradition. And then we got into the wagon, another case, and we talked about birds are the same as animals in this case, or birds at least that walk on the ground, like chickens. Then we talked about this issue of dropping it and then it rolls and breaks after, right? Does it go by the first person who threw it, right? Are they responsible or not necessarily? And we'll deal with that question more in tomorrow's daf. Wishing everybody a great day and a good week.